that were missed by President Zelensky. Security guarantees. We suggested talking about security guarantees last December, and he was perfectly aware of that. The only condition was that was there to agree to the demands to sign, to implement the agreements that were signed at the highest level under OSCE, so that no one tried to enhance one security at the expense of security of the others. He didn't want to execute this obligation, and his Western handlers didn't want to implement this agreement. His patrons didn't want to implement this agreement. They kept on saying that Ukraine is free to choose any alliances to enhance its security. So he's not telling you the truth. He is lying, to be frank, when he says that they are ready to talk about neutral status. We offered any ways to enhance security, to provide security. President Putin talked about that after his conversation with President Macron. He said it openly. The NATO enlargement is unacceptable, but we want to have joint talks. We want to make joint efforts to look for the ways to guarantee security, to look for conditions, to look for opportunities that would satisfy Ukraine, the European nations, and obviously the Russian Federation. Our initiatives on enhancing security that we made last December were aimed exactly on looking guarantees beyond exploration and enlargement of the military blocs. First of all, that was our aim. So these missed opportunities, President Zelensky are well aware of them, so he shouldn't now try to put the blame on someone else. Next question, please. NBC, Keir Simmons.
Foreign Minister.
Господин Лавров, какова цель этой операции? Вы меня слышите?
Mr. Lavrov, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Мы слышим вас.
Yes, we can hear you. Please talk.
Господин министр, какова цель
Minister,
этой операции?
what is the goal of this
Для
operation?
того, чтобы свергнуть демократически...
To overthrow democratically elected president of Ukraine, Zelensky?
Каков план выхода из операции?
What is the plan to stop the operation? You say you don't want to occupy Ukraine, but when Russia will bring in pro-Russian government, how will you withdraw troops? Oh, such a serious journalist, representative of such a serious media outlet, haven't even familiarized himself with the address made by President Putin from early last morning. Can he hear us? Yes, you can go on. All the answers to all the questions you have just raised are there in his address. And once again, I would like to draw your attention that everything was absolutely clear there. We see no chance of recognizing a government as democratic that uses genocide against their own people. Just tell me, to have a better understanding of your positions that you use to cover the current developments. Does democratic society that stands for democratic values and so on, do they accept actions on banning the language that is spoken by the huge part of the population, majority of the population actually? Do this democracy that you represent make decision about banning education in Russian language, or be it any language that people speak, starting from grade 5, for example, or ban using a mother tongue in everyday life, including in stores, including in talking in hotels or in other public spaces? And do democratic societies have this habit to declare that people who are now leave certain land in Ukraine now are not people. They are not humans. They are species, as President Zelensky put it. We just remember today during our talks how President Poroshenko, when he was elected president, how he promised after democratic election, how he promised to treat his own people. He said, in Ukraine that we control, we are going to have everything: schools, kindergartens, promotes food, welfare, and flourishing. And these ones, and he was pointing at Donbass, are going to sit in the basements. They will rot in these basements. And something like that was also said by President Zelensky when he demanded that those people who think themselves part of the Russian culture, they should go away from Ukraine. For example, if in Ireland, if they prohibited English language, what would the UK think about it? Or if in Belgium they would have forbidden French language? I can imagine that a law like that would last for more than a couple of days or even hours. But in the West, they only see it through the prism of their own egoistical interests. So when you are accused of something, you start to make all this ruckus. But when language, cultural, religious rights of millions, many millions of people in Ukraine are being violated, you focus not on human rights, you talk about democratically so-called democratic regime that does that. So read Putin's address. No one is going to occupy Ukraine. The goal of this operation is there in the open, to demilitarize and denazify, because constant torch marches, constant honoring Nazi officials, introducing Nazi habits as part of these so-called volunteer battalions. It is all done with the tacit agreement from the media outlets. And I can't help but mention that one reporter from CNN is doing something at the former engagement line, and he's traveling across Ukraine. But all these 8 years, no one, no Western company, including media outlets, respected media outlets presented here, they didn't cover what happened at the engagement line consistently. Whereas what happened at the militia front line, 24/7 we had our journalists who showed the actual truth, how the civilian infrastructure was destroyed, how women and children are killed, how they shell sites that in any situation must be protected first of all, otherwise it is defined as the war crime. Just like NATO aviation bombed Belgrade, and they were aiming knowingly the civilian trains on the bridges, they knowingly aimed the television stations. So Ukraine regime could use this as example. But what would be the result of all that is happening now? We will see, depending on the circumstances. As President Putin said, he reaffirmed one more time that we are interested in seeing Ukrainian people independent. We want them to have the government that would represent all the people in all their versatility. And we don't want to have a situation when it is run from abroad, externally, and this management, this control wants to encourage neo-Nazism, genocide of Russians, and they want to use Ukraine as a tool of containing Russia.
Пожалуйста, BBC, Steve Rosenberg.
BBC, Steve Rosenberg.
Thank you.
Спасибо. Господин министр, давайте отбросим эфемизм.
Mr. Lavrov, let's put euphemisms away.
Это не специальная
It's not a special military operation, isn't it? That's a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. How can you justify the invasion of a peaceful nation of your neighbor? How do you think? When you strike Ukraine, how do you think they will want to go to the east and not to the west? Well, talking about euphemisms, we have a lot to learn from Anglo-Saxons. Just look at the description of all the interventions that were made against Yugoslavia, and they were actually fighting for democracy. That wasn't a euphemism, so I understand it now. Look at Iraq, destruction of Iraq, destruction of Libya. There they also promoted democracy, hundreds, thousands of casualties. So I'm not even going to compete with you in terms of euphemisms. And answering your question, what to do about the desire of Ukrainians who want to go there or here, they should have thought about that from the very start, when back in 2008, President Putin at the summit of NATO, Russia in Bucharest, he warned them to think thrice, the members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, before they state proudly that Ukraine and Georgia would be admitted to NATO. And they were saying that it was a great compromise that Germany and France succeeded in, who replaced the American proposition about stating that Ukraine and Germany will be given a roadmap to eventually join NATO. Back then he said, just think about it. Be reasonable. Why do you treat an independent country like that, who are just strengthening, enhancing their security at the moment? And already back then, he said what he wrote in his article, how fragile is the Ukrainian state, how carefully one should treat it. But our NATO counterparts, without any euphemisms, they just went right there. And they pursued only one goal. You talked about the west of Ukraine or east of the Ukraine. They wanted to subjugate the Russian language, the Russian people of Ukraine, to the pro-Bandera mentality. Already back then, I'm sure they had this goal in mind. And not to use any euphemism. What we want is Ukrainian people, or as President Putin put it, all the peoples that inhabit the modern Ukraine had the opportunity to freely, without any attempts to put them in the restrictions of Bandera mentality. They must have a chance to determine their own future. Russia will provide dematerialization of Ukraine and denazification of Ukraine. We suffered too much from Nazism, and the same goes from Ukraine. So we can't just stand idly and look away from what is happening there. But about demilitarization, everything is well known. It's in the open. Just read the American colonels and generals who are retired. Unfortunately, they start saying the truth after they retire. In unison, they all say that the United States would have never agreed to deploying the weapons that would make their neighbors militarized. So since we are talking about the year 2008 and the Bucharest summit, back then envoy of the U.S. NATO, Ivo Dalton, later he called this decision made in Bucharest the biggest mistake in the history of the alliance, without any euphemisms. The Chinese media corporation of China, the floor is yours.
Sorry, because I'm in a slightly tricky...
I'm sorry. My name is Matthew Chen from CNN. Well, he's not polite. He works in Ukraine now, so he was contaminated with this unpoliteness virus. Chinese corporation takes the floor now. Because CNN, upper BBC, now that's too much. I'm in Kyiv now, Mr. Lavrov, and Kyiv is bombarded, is shelled. Please give the floor to Chinese journalists. Why Russian forces are now coming here and encircling the city? Please, be so kind. Allow a Chinese journalist to ask her question. Yes, we are listening. Chinese Media Corporation, you can ask your question, please.
Would you like to repeat the question, sir?
Matthew, can you stay silent for a while? You weren't given the floor. If you are in Ukraine and they somehow ruin your good manners, we have nothing to do with that. That's not our fault. Once again, be so kind. Chinese Media Corporation. Has something happened? Is anything wrong?